Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. I'm your host, Johnny Laser. Welcome to NYSA Presents, where you see what you've been missing in 3D. And it'll certainly be a better experience if you had a set of these Anaglyph glasses. If you don't, they're available on our website. And also these masks are available. You can call them, I'm proud to be a Democrat. No, only kid, come on. Mask, what's the big deal? Anyway, and a happy Passover to Passover people. Today we have a great show for you. We're dropping a coin into Joe Pedoto's Anaglyph Jukebox. Then the last in the stereo gallery music with some great images from Jim Harp. Then the next installment of E.JAMES Smith's This is New York, the 3D soundscape series, or let's say 4D. And a session by Dave Comeau on the clone tool feature of the ever-popular and indispensable stereo photo maker. And the first of a two-part Life is 3D segment by Jim McManus on the amazing artist Salvadore Dali. Now, if you fly into New York's LaGuardia Airport, you have no way of knowing this, but you are flying over the 1964 and 1939 World's Fairgrounds. You're also flying over Rikers Island. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Coney Island and Ellis Island. So you might think of Rikers Island as another interesting island to visit while in New York City. Well, it's free to visit, but you have to get there on a Department of Corrections bus wearing handcuffs, because Rikers Island is the prison for the city of New York. Now, back in 1965, Salvadore Dali donated one of his paintings to the prisoners of Rikers Island, where it resided for many years. Then in March of 2003, some correction officers decided that fewer and fewer art lovers were arriving on that bus. And not only would they be doing a huge favor to the art community, but it wouldn't hurt their retirement plans if they granted it clemency. So they went about hatching a scheme to liberate said painting. They created a distraction and replaced the painting with an extremely poor replica, figuring that the current population of art lovers would not take notice. Well, they underestimated the eye of the incarcerated, and that led to, and for the life of me, I cannot understand why it has not been turned into a movie, and only can happen in New York tale. And also led to at least one of the correction officers being corrected for a few years. The painting was never recovered, and likely is hanging somewhere in a garage in Brooklyn. They never said who they gave it to, likely because whoever was going to fence it would not take kindly to being introduced to the art-loving world. And while it's bad enough to be on Rikers Island, surrounded by the East River, it sure beat being at the bottom of the East River. Now, hey, listen, do you want to know where, you know it's spring, because I got the Johnny Laser blazer on. Now, where can you find one of these Johnny Lasers? The only way you're going to find that is meet me. Now, today, let's see, we got a really good show. We're going to try to move this as quickly as possible, which is not possible for me, and you know that already. First of all, congratulations on the folks at Stereo Pi. I know they've got that funded, well funded. I can't wait to have mine to play with. And a lot of good stuff going on. Oh, for the next gallery will be Signs of Spring. Now, it could be anything, so I'm going to leave it to your wonderfully creative minds to. So the next one, remember, signs of spring. It could even be a sign of spring. Whatever it is, it's a great spring. It's going to be nice. We're going to get out. Things are going to be good. Next, I want to get, if you people know how to work that little hands up thing, I'm not going to do it now. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but if you know how to, do that wave hand, whatever that is, on your panel down there. I'm not going to do it now. Maybe afterwards. I just want to know how many people got injected, how the vaccine's going. I want to know how you guys are doing out there, because I really care for all of you. So anyway, we're going to move on to great stuff. Brilliant work. Joe Pedoto's Anaglyph Jukebox. You're going to love it. I will see you on the other side. You needn't see me. So for the next few moments, you will be taking, and I'll put my cans on so they can tell me nothing's working. Everything's pretty fine. See you guys later.
Welcome to today's edition of the Anaglyph Jukebox. You never know what you'll find on the old jukebox. Let's press B31. Okay, we've got romance comics, 3D. Our first two panels today showcase the great talent of Frank Frazetta, known more for his brawny barbarians and violent imagery than romance. But Frazetta brings his outstanding ink and brushwork to the task and excels as usual. Plus, the female lead in Too Late for Love looks an awful lot like one of my favorite brunettes from the 1950s, Betty Page. World War II increased the adult readership of comics, which was deemed good for morale. After the war, the public's taste for superheroes waned, and publishers scrambled to find a subject that would sell as well as Superman, Batman, and Captain Marvel did. They tried most everything. Cowboys were a safe bet, but they didn't fly off the racks. It may be surprising to learn that the next best-selling genre in comic books was created in 1947 by the same team that had created one of the greatest of all the superhero characters just 6 years earlier. That team was the Simon & Kirby Shop, the character Captain America. Their new creation was titled Young Romance, with a prominent subhead that read, designed for the more adult readers of comics. It was a bestseller, and it spawned the typical dozens of imitators. I find it fascinating that an artist like Jack Kirby, who's known more than anything else for the great, barely restrained energy bursting out of his panels, could also excel in telling intimate, up to a point, stories like these. Usually, there was first-person narration, and the plots were at least nominally more realistic than whatever Batman and his lover, Robin, were doing with the Joker in that abandoned typewriter factory with all those muscular goons. The influences of pulp magazine romance writing, radio soap operas, newspaper strips like Mary Worth, and the slightly edgy adult confession magazines of the day are easy to spot in these comics. There were no continuing characters, and the stories relied heavily on troubled domestic situations with large doses of melodrama and sentimentality. Last-page reversals were common in these stories. What a fool I've been. I've lost my last chance at love. Of course, the content was patriarchal, with severely limited acceptable roles for late teen or young adult women. Engagement or marriage to a bland young man without facial hair but with significant earning potential was the ultimate goal. No bad boys or beatniks need apply. A lot of mainstream comic book fans avoid or dismiss romance titles, but they had a huge, loyal audience, not all of it female. Simon & Kirby's two flagship books, Young Romance and Young Love, were continuously published into the late 1970s. Not everyone was a fan. Certainly not New York City psychiatrist Frederick Wertham, author of Seduction of the Innocent, a poorly researched and biased book that came close to shutting down the entire comic book industry. Wertham wrote, "Studying these love confession books is even more tedious than studying the usual crime comics. You have to wade through all the mushiness, the false sentiments, the social hypocrisy, the titillation, the cheapness." Like I said, not a fan. He goes on, "One story, I Was a Spoiled Brat, begins with a big picture of an attractive girl looking at herself in the mirror and bearing herself considerably. Adolescent boys call these headlight comics. The dash of violence here is supplied by a hit-and-run driving accident and by her father's dying of a heart attack when he hears about his daughter's life. As the brat daughter says of herself, fires that I did not understand burned within me. My brain reeled."
Well, isn't that great? Those series are so wonderful. I can't wait to get to the other ones, and you're going to... And now, for something completely different.
A 2016 tour of My Fair Lady that went through about 8 cities in China. This is an orchestra pit. I think this is in Shanghai, and fans were very friendly. People who came to the shows would always come up and want to take my picture. So I got to the point where I would always say, well, yes, you can take my picture, but I want a picture for myself as well. I had my trusty Panasonic 3D1 with me, and it was very easy to hand it over to whoever was with these folks and have them take pictures. So I have lots and lots of pictures of me with various fans. This was a very big thing with Chinese theater fans. They just love to get pictures of, the musicians were accessible. We were in the pit, so they always wanted to come up and check us out. Normally in the United States, no one ever looks in the orchestra pit. They don't even care that you're there.
What year was this, Jim?
This was 2016. I also got to go back there in 2018, and I was actually there in early 2020. I kind of left about a week before they closed it down. I was in Shanghai. This picture, I wish I could really put it on a huge screen, because this was just to show how big the theaters there were. This was in Guangzhou, and you can see this is just standing backstage, looking way into the main part of the theater. There's enough room to put about 4 average Broadway theaters in this facility here. And they do, we were told that some of the Beijing opera things they do require lots and lots of very extensive scenery and props, and they just like to have a lot of room for them. But lots of things over there were just very, very big, and this gives you some sense of it. But to stand in the theater this size, it was breathtaking.
Yeah, I had this completely wrong, Jim. I didn't realize this was the stage.
This is backstage. Yeah, this is just keep walking. See, there's the audience.
That's a lot of room, man.
Yeah, there's enough room we could put a few lasers in there, don't you think?
You'd have to put a few to hit the back of the hall.
Yeah, they need to be extra powered, I think. This isn't China. This is Broadway. This was a show called Holiday Inn. I didn't play on this one, but I provided keyboards and did synth programming. This, I think, was in 2017. It ran for about 6 months. And actually, interestingly enough, this theater was the old Studio 54. It was converted into a Broadway theater, I think, about 20 years ago. But we are actually looking at Studio 54, and this is just, fortunately, when I'm sitting there at the sound checks and rehearsals and things, you can't take pictures during shows. But if you're at the dress rehearsal, it's usually possible to discreetly get a few shots in. And this is the Mermaid Parade. It's always fun catching. I think this was 2015. This was, I think, my Canon S95s up here. And just kind of a fun shot of the band playing away. This was at the Summer Palace, a beautiful old royal, kind of the summer place where the royals in China would go outside of the big city. It's outside of Beijing. And you can see this gentleman is playing a variety of different woodwind instruments and has maracas on his feet. And I wish I had an audio recording of him, but he was really quite fun to watch.
I thought that was you starting to learn the flute there, Jim.
He has a little more hair than I do. That's how you can tell. Thanks a lot. Thanks for looking, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you once again. Now we're going to get on to, and I'm going to let him explain a little bit about this before we begin. Maybe I can just stop the share. You want to lead us into this just a little bit there, Jamie?
Thank you, John. Yeah, this was my friend Matthew Gordts and I back in 2002, and then again in 2003. Walked around Manhattan, 32 miles from the tip in the south. The first time we went up the west side, second time we went up the east side, and got back to the same spot later that night. And so that was almost 20 years ago, and we thought we'd see if we could do it again this year.
That's it. Official space helmet on, Captain Video. If you have earphones, I'll give you 2 seconds. That you've got your seconds, your time's up, to plug them in, because it'll be more fun if your head is wrapped in fancy cans. But if not, just turn your speakers up loud enough to get you thrown out of the building, and we're ready to go.
Okay, it's roughly 6:25 a.m. on March 21st. We are standing at the tip of Manhattan in the Battery, looking out at the Statue of Liberty, about to begin our 32-mile hike. This is FDR at East 11th Street. 10, so we've been at this almost 4 hours. Gracie Mansion, overlooking the East River and the tip of Roosevelt Island. The Triborough Bridge and the Hell Gate Bridge. All right, this is the Harlem River. We are on the right under the aqueduct. This is Inwood Hill Park. We are at where the Harlem River meets the Hudson River, overlooking the railroad bridge. Roughly halfway point, more than halfway. About to head south down the Hudson River. We're at some old structure. There's stairs here on the side of the hill. We're sitting on two stanchions or something. It looks like there used to be a dock here at one point. Okay, Matthew, how are you feeling here at, what mile is it, 19, 20?
20.3 or it's 4.
Okay, here we are at the George Washington Bridge. We are here, buddy.
I have pains in all kinds of
Me
places.
too. This is the end of the walk.
You did it.
Activity paused.
And I'm going to hand you to Jim McManus, and we got it from here. Thank you, Jim.
Oh, thank you, John. Thank you to everybody there, the whole crew at NYSA, again, for putting on these awesome meetings and for inviting me to be part of them. This may be the most comprehensive representation of his 3D works in one place yet. No retouching has been done by me except for alignment. I wanted to respect Dali's artistic interpretation with the original colors and the discrepancy in the colors that he intended. Most people know, this is in 2D, by the way. Obviously, you haven't figured that out yet. But Persistence of Memory is a famous painting that we all know Dali is the melting clock guy. But he was so much more than that. He produced a huge variety of art of over 1,500 pieces in his lifetime, sculpture and paintings and other interesting things. To give you an idea of the timeline we're dealing with, this Persistence of Memory was done in 1931, 40 to 50 years before he created most of his stereoscopic works of art. So we're talking, he had perfected his other, methods of painting and then was diving into more things that, sort of open up the doors of the future for him. Although tempted, I didn't convert this just on purpose because I didn't want to muddy the waters. The photographs you see today have been tinkered with, the actual photos are conversions, but the artwork is pure Dali 3D. Now, like I said, he dabbled in other mediums as well, like this. This was he calls it the first cylindric chronohologram portrait of Alice Cooper's brain. Alice Cooper, the rock musician, sat and you can actually watch footage of the shoot on YouTube, which is really interesting. But it's his early experiment with holography, and it's an actual hologram encased in lucite. Dali was a true athlete of the psyche. When once asked if he was on drugs, he simply replied, "I am drugs, take me." He gained an early interest in the abnormalities of visual perception, planning to subject them to his own expressive intentions. In this endeavor, he moved on from initial work with anamorphoses to what he himself termed hologramorphoses. These, he believed, would assure him a kind of immortality, that of holographically stored, laser-generated images. You can even, like I said, see film footage of the shoot on YouTube of this particular thing where Alice Cooper had to sit there and hold all kinds of weird objects. But the hologram itself is pretty amazing. It's viewable from any direction. I think there's even footage of that on YouTube. There is a app called Dreams of Dali, which was previously only available at the museums. And it lets you explore, in this case, sort of a surrealistic world based on one of his, actually based on an amalgam of a bunch of paintings. And believe it or not, there's the sort of Easter egg in there is Alice Cooper squatting in the same sort of lotus position as he is encased in lucite there, down in the basement of one of those two figures. And while we're on this, I want you to notice those two figures in the background because they're going to come back later. Dali tended to latch onto things that he deemed important and repeated those themes in his work quite a bit. Okay, this is a funny photo. It was not shot in 3D, but it's called Dali Atomicus, and it was taken in 1948 by a photographer that worked with him quite a bit, Philippe Halsman. Notice the assistant's hand on the left side of the frame holding the chair in place. It was intended to be cropped out later. And believe it or not, the water and the cats are all real. We're not talking about, you know, frozen in time posing or anything. So how many times do you think cats and buckets of water were tossed into the air to get this photo? Well, the answer is over 10, at least 10, because I've seen proof. You can actually find proofs in stills online of the different versions of this shot. And it's so funny, you know, just the quest for the perfect the perfect bizarre photo. So I didn't convert this, by the way. I found this online, and it's just a good, you know, taste of kind of Dali's interesting, penchant for the bizarre. Best known of the surrealist painters, he was an artist with boundless curiosity who was constantly in search of the latest technical developments in order to apply them to his creations. From the mid-60s throughout the entire 70s, his interest focused above all else on virtual images and depth, utilizing the techniques of anamorphosis, holography, and stereoscopy. This served to enhance the three-dimensional quality already present in most of his works. Technical innovations in the field of optics interested the painter very much, since his approach was firmly based in the world of mathematics. It is therefore no surprise that Dali began to study rhinoceros horns and the logarithmic curves derived from them, sometime around the end of 1964. He also studied the structure of flies' eyes, which led him to conclude, thanks to his research, that he'd discovered totally stereoscopic three-dimensional painting. The results of this research can be seen in the stereodiptychs that Dali painted throughout the 70s. The catalyst for this line of investigation was the work of Gerrit Dou. Seeing an exhibition in Paris sometime between 1970 and 71 that included work by this 17th century Dutch painter, Dali discovered that Dou had made duplicates of his paintings. Dali suspected that these were not just identical copies, and upon studying them more closely, noticed that there were indeed small differences between them. He became convinced that it was therefore essential to view the pictures together in order to get the full effect of what the artist wanted to convey with their works. This is a piece by Dou called The Mousetrap from, I believe, 1650. Now, you may have seen some of this image in particular before. This was, I believe, used in the LACMA exhibit from a couple of years ago. Dali was also influenced by the mid-century stereograms produced by Oscar Fischinger. This one in particular is called Triangular Planes. So you can see that in a lot of his work. It sort of takes on a very abstract quality to it. Now, what's going to follow here are just a handful of images. They're all in 2D. But they're of the exhibit that the museum, there was a parent museum that Dali actually helped design himself in his hometown of Figueras, Spain. And there I believe 5 years ago, they put on an exhibit of his 3D works. So I just thought you guys would be interested in seeing what an exhibit of this type would look like. And notice how they included virtual, digital, it's not a VR headset, but digital viewers in the wall, so they don't have to occupy all the floor space with giant fragile mirror viewers, because that's what these were intended to be viewed with, which was a Wheatstone style stereoscope. So everybody could admire the paintings, and if you could, preview, then great. But otherwise, you walk up to the wall and see a digital version. This is from the main museum in Figueras, Spain. This is an exhibit from 2016, I believe. Note the clever use, like I said, of the wall-mounted digital viewers. Dali began to utilize the Wheatstone style stereoscope with mirrors, applying the technique to single large paintings, which I'm going to show you a few of when we get started here in just a minute. He actually would create a stereo image on one canvas. Consequently, he would then use the technique to realize pairs of canvases where the two works would be almost identical, but with slightly different vantage viewpoints. We, as fans of 3D, know what he was talking about, but a lot of people weren't familiar with that concept, and they didn't understand what was different about the two paintings, except for in some cases the colors. And like I said, he could get radically different in his color selection, intending you to experience that retinal rivalry. Dali once explained that his most well-painted pictures, in his opinion, were these stereoscopic double paintings. He performed his experiments in stereo painting, created by means of physical geometric constructions, or with photographs taken from two viewpoints. After the preliminary design work, he would have two independent and often irreconcilable images photographed, then draw them and divide them up spatially, and would then reunite them on the canvases, thus creating the first stereoscopic collage, and like I referred to earlier, what he referred to as the first true stereoscopic painting. Everybody else, I'm sure, in his opinion, was just, dabbling in the art. His adaptation of the Wheatstone style mirror stereoscope enabled Dali to paint large format pictures up to 13 feet high in some cases. Well, at least in one case for a stereo picture. He actually did 18 masterworks, 6 of which are over here in St. Pete. And they're like 13 feet. I almost said a dozen feet, but they're a little bigger. But they are huge, and you really have to stand back quite a ways. Now, the chair is one of the more well-known stereoscopic paintings. And again, 13 feet high. It's like, how would you even view that thing with a Wheatstone stereoscope? You'd have to be so far back, or you'd have to be elevated to be on the center, on the center line. So, it's funny. It's such a vertical format. I think in the next photo, you can see somebody looking up at it, and they give you an idea of the scale. It's crazy. It's just insane. The amount of detail that comes through in these masterworks. One of my particular favorites over here in St. Pete is the hallucinogenic Toreador. And man, you think you've seen that painting in a book? Forget it. You see a thing up close, 12 feet high, you'll be, mesmerized for days, basically. There's an example of one of those single canvas stereo paintings, and we're going to see that. I went in and I actually doubled the images so you can see that. But those were designed to be cross-viewed in person. And but anyway, I fixed it so that you can view it with your properly formatted whatever you're watching on today. That's a very popular one as well, called Gala's Foot. Now you'll notice that his wife Gala appears in many paintings. We'll talk about her more in depth in a little bit. Oh, this is interesting. While we're on this one, this structure of DNA you'll see repeated in a couple of other of his works as well, and we'll see that in just a minute in the background of Gala's Foot. And I've included also sort of, like I said, early and alternate versions of paintings that I was already familiar with, and I didn't know he had either created completely different ones or a study and then went on to paint the finished version completely separately. Okay, so the first one I want to focus on here, this is simply titled Untitled Stereoscopic Painting, which is ironic because it's the only one that I couldn't find a companion image for. So as far as I know, maybe he never did complete the second eye version. But it's interesting that it was sort of the beginning of his, abstract inspiration there. And you can see the figure of him outlined. His back is actually to us down in the lower left corner. And we'll see that repeated as a common theme in a lot of his work. Now, this is called Stereoscopic Owl. Again, a stereo painting on a single canvas. And it's designed to be viewed cross-view style. And then go ahead and hit next, and you'll actually be able to see it in 3D easier. And it's very similar, if you notice, those of us that are familiar with them, to those old Keystone Stereo View, eye test cards. They have sort of similar geometric patterns to them, but very striking in depth. I mean, Dali was not afraid to use depth and exaggerate it to, the best of his abilities. This is called The Harmony of the Spheres. And again, single stereo painting on a single canvas. And although the spheres themselves don't blend in 3D, the human figure beneath it does very well. And you'll see that it actually gives you quite a nice 3D image with a very realistic sense of depth, except for maybe the giant rock of Gibraltar thing way beyond him. That maybe looks a little too close. But otherwise, I mean, the arm extends naturally into the scene. What I think may be an intentional stereo painting on a single canvas, but it's not. It wasn't actually classified as a stereoscopic work, but I can't help but think that this accidental 3D is no accident. And by the way, you'll see this female figure repeated. It's the same one of the two that were back on the Dreams of Dali slide, and you'll see that again and again in later works. I just basically took the center and the right-hand part of that image, and you do get, two very distinct planes of depth with figures that were of equal size. Again, I didn't mess with the geometric sizes or anything. And I can't help but think that Dali may have done that on purpose, and it was sort of a hidden stereoscopic image. Now let's get to the real stereo things here. The next image is called The Study for, and again, this is it's got some retinal rivalry in it, but that was his intention. In some cases, he actually painted different images, which is really bizarre. But it's interesting that you'll see there's the female figure again. This couple comes from an old, it's called the Angelus, and it's by a French painter called Mallet, and it was in the 1850s, I believe. And for some reason, Dali fell in love with that painting and repeated these figures in his own work. It's kind of like how Warhol would use, a classic image in his own work repeatedly, a bunch of different ways. But Dali would take that into an extreme. This image, you'll see, again, the same couple. This is called the Eye of the Angelus. And same repeated figures. I've seen at least probably a dozen works, not all in 3D, but at least 3 or 4 in 3D that use that same couple. And the rest are in 2D, but you'll see them again and again. It's funny. Okay, now here's a classic one, a very popular 3D painting, but again, a lot of people have only seen one of the 2D halves. This is called, I love the titles too. The titles get longer and longer. Dali from behind, painting Gala from behind, immortalized by 6 virtual corneas, momentarily reflected in 6 real mirrors. Now, this is version 1, and you'll notice that a common subject in his works beside himself is that of his companion Gala, his wife, his muse, his manager, and his emotional compass for 53 years. But I did find a separate version of this, version 2, which I think may be just differently colored. I haven't gone in and done enough detective work to see if I can really, prove them as separate paintings. I think it may be just differently colored, but it's interesting that they would do that, instead of replicating via common methods we would do today. Sometimes these artists would actually paint different versions for different purposes. For at least 20 of those 53 years that they were together, Dali possessed a strong passion for the third dimension and was forever searching for methods of creating in the eye of the beholder the illusion of spatial plasticity. One of the qualities that most fascinated him was the possibility of escaping the order and the limitations imposed by the rules of optical experiments, and thus he would be able to recreate totally new illusions in 3D, eventually moving on into the fourth dimension and thus into immortality. Dali embraced retinal rivalry, like I've said before, using it often in his stereoscopic works. He allowed the colors in the 2 painted images to vary, most of the time, very obviously. He felt that tonal variations between left and right images added the 3D effect of luster, which is best described as the effect of light reflecting off a surface and entering each eye at a slightly different angle, lending a kind of depth to an object. Now, we 3D photographers know exactly what he's talking about. When you take a picture of something reflective, you see the light reflect off it differently in your eyes, and that's one of the giveaways that it was actually shot in stereo, not a conversion. That's the structure of the DNA in the background that I was referring to that reappears in a couple of images as well. We'll see a variation of this again later, featured in its own 3D work in part 2 next week. Okay, now here's interesting. I had seen one of these versions of this image, but I had never seen the 3 that I dug up. This is an early study of a painting called Maids in Waiting, Las Meninas. And it's almost watercolor-like in appearance. As a matter of fact, it may have been watercolor. I'm not sure, but I want you guys to notice the depth at which the artist's paintbrush is represented. It's right at canvas depth. Basically it's at screen depth. And so the finished version, which is next, obviously it looks a lot more refined. It's painted in a different, probably oils. And again, the artist's brush is right there at screen depth, at canvas depth. But look at this third alternate version I found. It's completely different, with the brush now receding into the picture, far into the picture, as a matter of fact. Again, a different painting style, but the same basic shapes. Again, in all 3, Gala, you see there silhouetted, observing at what's going on. And that's, again, a common theme in many of his pictures, especially in his 3D pictures. He would always look, sort of portray her looking into the scene. Study for a stereoscopic work. Now, Dali was not afraid to introduce sexual themes into his work, sometimes to the point of grotesque distortion. As we all know, he liked to, the guy of, things that melt and misshapen weird objects. So this is actually fairly human looking. If you think about it, this is normal looking. And again, look who's down there at the bottom, Gala looking on. She seems like she was interested in everything, I guess. Literally observing the state of Dali's mind. Now, realizing that depth is the most powerful of the artist's spatial illusions, and that methods of conveying depth relief are all stereoscopic in character and thus derived from binocular vision, Dali once wrote, stereoscopy immortalizes and legitimizes geometry, for thanks to it, we have the third dimension of the sphere, which is capable of containing and limiting the universe in an august, immortal, incorruptible, and royal fashion. Binocular vision is the trinity of transcendent physical perception, the Father, the right eye, the Son, the left eye, and the Holy Ghost, the brain, the miracle of the tongue of fire, the luminous virtual image, having become an incorruptible pure spirit. He sure had a way with words, much less a paintbrush. And next, and that's all I have for you this week.
Fantastic, thank you. I had the privilege of seeing that earlier, so I got like a 3 or 4. You can't get enough of it. Really fantastic, and well presented, perfect. Yes, next week we're going to take it up a notch because we will have someone who will explain in some detail, because he was present during some of these works and helped in a way. So he was a protege, and you're going to really enjoy that next week. You know what happened while I was watching? I'll save that for later because a mystical thing occurred. Now we're going to move on to, well, actually one last little detail, because I'm never done. Wheatstone, that was one of the things about Wheatstone. He said, well, now that if not everyone out there may understand or know who Wheatstone was, but that's the first 3D patent. This is the guy that really figured it out. Okay. As a matter of fact, our dear friend Sheldon, when I would always forget the name Wheatstone. Okay. I'd do this. And Sheldon would chime in Wheatstone. That was our code. Wheatstone, got it. He created this thing with mirrors that allowed the first really representation or the understanding of how the eyes work and how it really functions. It's really not the eyes, it's the brain that's doing the calculations. Anyway, one of his things that he said was, now I've created this. I understand this now, but no painter will ever be able to use this because no one's going to be able to paint the same thing in 2 sides. Of course, the year later, photography was invented, which I always blow people's minds. But no, 3D outdates photography by a year. Puzzle me that one, Batman. Now we're going to go on to the Secretary of the New York Stereoscopic Association, resident guru, smart guy. You forget it. This guy knows a lot. I don't want, now that I've thoroughly embarrassed him, we're going to head into an interesting primer. If you don't understand, I know you all love Stereo Photo Maker, but there are parts of it that are kind of baffling, but very useful. We're going to maybe clear up some of that right now.
Last week, I was preparing images for the NYSA's Fancylift presentation. I noticed some images that could benefit from a quick cleanup with Stereo Photo Maker's clone tool, so I thought I'd make a quick video showing how to use this powerful feature. The video is posted to YouTube, so you can step through the process on your own. Along the way, I got some feedback from David Starkman and redid the video to incorporate some of his tips. Be sure to check out his excellent write-up at the link in the description. And thanks to Jim McManus at lifeis3d.com for allowing me to use his images as examples. Please note this video assumes you already have some familiarity with Stereo Photo Maker, or SPM. If you don't have SPM, I'll provide a download link in the description. As noted earlier, there's a few images that we think we can clean up with the clone tool. So in this image, if I zoom in to the very top, you see that there's this funny little orb floating here. That could either be a visitor from the spirit realm, but more probably it's a speck of dust caught by one of the lenses. Let's switch to the side-by-side view for more information. Okay, so here you can see that it's probably a speck of dust in the right lens. We can try fixing this by copying the tree bark from the left side over to the right side. And this can be accomplished using the clone tool. The clone tool is always sitting there waiting to be used if you're in the side-by-side or in the Anaglyph views, and a few others. It does not work in the interlaced or quick adjustment view. Okay, since we're in side-by-side, it'll work here. So if I hold down Shift, then notice that I get this brush. And what that's going to do is let me copy information over from the left image to the right. And that's why it's so crucial to get the alignment proper. I can see I got a bit of a dark part of the tree. I probably want to copy a little bit more of this part over here. So let me just adjust the window slightly. Let's give it a little bit more. Okay, and then we're just going to, I'm holding Shift and I'm just clicking a little bit. And notice I've cleaned up that little bit. And if I zoom back out, if you're really looking, you can see it, but I think we've done a pretty good job. I'll pop back to show you the Anaglyph view. And you can see that we've gotten rid of that little speck. Just to show you a little bit more information about the clone tool, if I go up to Edit and I go down to Clone Brush Setting all the way at the bottom, or it's Control N. If I click on that, that brings up the setting that I had. If I hold down Shift, I have this little dot, and I can change the shape, or I can change the size or the edge, much like in other image manipulation programs like GIMP or Photoshop. One thing we can't forget to do is adjust the window back to where we want it. So I could switch the easy adjustment view, but I'll just do it in Anaglyph. And since I know I'm going to be presenting these side by side for 3D TVs, I'll probably break the window a tiny bit and I'll just align on the body of the guitar. You can use this technique for things that have moved due to a missync, like a flag in the background or clouds, or you can possibly remove things that are far in the distance that have too much divergence. Keep in mind that whenever you clone from one side to the other, you're going to flatten the image in that spot. So it should be used sparingly in a place that the viewer won't normally be looking for depth, like in the tree in this picture. It's also worth noting that I like to use the clone tool if needed at the end of my image preparation process. This would be after the image has been aligned, color adjusted, cropped, etc. This way, if the clone tool doesn't give us pleasing results, we can just use the image as is or do advanced manipulation over in Photoshop or GIMP. And the two images that I demonstrate today have already gone through the preparation process and are otherwise ready for presentation. So let's look at our next image. So in this image, we can see in the upper left, there is a little light that is in one eye and not the other. So if I switch to my easy adjustment view, I can see it's in one eye and not the other. And I'm going to need to fix that. Now the difference here is, whereas before our problem was on the right-hand side, now our problem is on the left-hand side. And we said that the way the clone tool works is it copies the pixels from the left to the right. So if we just use the clone tool as is, if we switch over to the side-by-side mode, if we hold down Shift and we're going to click on that, it's going to bring that light in to the right-hand side. That's probably not what we want. Even though it's okay to have a flat light at his elbow, it's probably better to make both sides black and not draw attention away from the guitarist. So let's undo using Control-Z. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the images with the X key, and then I'm going to clone from the left to the right this time, right? Pretty quick. And then we're going to hit X to flip it back. And now we've got a nice image. It's cleaned up nicely and in Anaglyph. You'll find that you probably won't use the clone tool very often. Only sometimes it comes in handy, so you might need to do a little bit of trial and error each time you use it. Good luck, and stay tuned for more adventures in Stereo Photo Maker.
Wow. Again, fantastic job there, explaining something that's very critical to all of us. Okay, announcement next week. Remember your assignment, boing, Signs of Spring. Of course, we're going to go to the after party in another moment. Meet us in VR. And a continuation next week of Salvadore Dali, which incidentally, while I was sitting here considering the persistence of memory, things got very strange, man. Dali, man, So all of a sudden this thing showed up. So